Cammie over here, just she'll wave her hand. She'll be passing around the microphone, so you don't have to get up to come to the podium or anything. We can come to you. This is a session on vehicle registration fee and utility fees for replacing special assessments. Cammie, who I've already introduced you to, she has a sign-up sheet. If you could just sign in, just so we know who's all here and everything. If you want to speak when we get to that point, just raise your hand, and Cammie will be happy to take care of you. And we also have some frequently asked questions that we've been evolving as we get different questions coming in. So Cammie will just pass those around. If you want a copy, she's happy to. You can share, or you can take one for yourself, or if you want to take one home or something like that, that's great too. I'm Mark Roloff. I'm the city manager, and this is Russ Van Gompel. He's our finance director, and this is third in the meetings we've been having, public meetings, to get input and explain what we're proposing to do. And what we're proposing to do is to replace special assessments for roads with a combination of vehicle registration fee and utility fee charges. So Russ is going to go through a presentation to kind of explain things, hopefully answer most of your questions. But one of the things we've learned through this process is that other questions come up that we didn't necessarily anticipate, and to the degree that you have a question that we haven't fielded yet, we will be happy to, we'll incorporate those into our frequently asked questions that we're putting up on our website. So please feel free to ask questions, and we're happy to do that. The presentation that we're going to be giving you is also going to be on our website. So I know the other day some people were taking photos of the slides on the screen. You're welcome to do that, but it's also available on our website, and you can access it that way as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Russ to give you a presentation on what we're proposing to do, and then we'll get to Q&A.
Thanks, Mark. Again, I'm Russ Van Gompel, the finance director. I've been with the city for about a little over 4 years, but I have about 40 years in local government experience, being a finance director, being an administrator, and actually the city manager for the city of Eau Claire. So got a lot of experience in dealing with municipal finance, and trying to walk you through this process here. So, you know, the main question is, why are we here today, and why are we doing this change? We are looking at special assessments and the impact of special assessments, particularly on residential homes in the central part of our community. And those costs have continued to escalate, and we got a slide in just a minute that we'll talk about that, but we've had a lot of increase in the construction cost for utilities. In some of the earlier meetings, we had a couple of questions about the cost of special assessments. It's really trying to minimize and find a funding source to replace special assessments. So it's really a new fee, but it's also then replacing special assessments. The impact on special assessments on households has been going up quite significantly. And what we're proposing for the City Council to consider in February is a combination of funding methods that help make it more fair and to help reallocate the cost. So if we're looking at our street paving costs, and again, this is information we're giving today is kind of, you know, in a summary form, but if you look at the cost of paving a 32-foot wide street in the city of Oshkosh, and you had a typical house, and not every house has a 60-foot frontage, but in this illustration, we're just showing what a 60-foot frontage property would be. Back in 2008, the cost of that assessment was $3,360 for the paving portion. In 2013, it was $3,738. In 2018, went up to $5,604. And then in 2023, it's $7,440. That is just the street portion of the assessments. What we've tried to do from a financing perspective and a construction perspective is not only look at the condition of the street, but also looking at the condition of the utilities underneath the street. So we looked at not only street pavement costs, which is reflected here, but also the utility costs underneath that.
And I would also point out, because we get this question often, the width of streets in the city vary depending on if it's a big arterial versus a small residential. And we're primarily talking about residences here. I've done a presentation with the business community, so that's more geared to them. But for residents, the 32-foot wide street is the maximum that we charge of width-wise for residential streets. So that's probably the closest example. But with that said, 60 feet is merely just an illustration. Older parts of the city, we have lots that are only 40 feet wide, which would take that number down a little bit. But at the same time, there are also streets in residential areas in newer parts of the city where you have 80 or 100 or even 120 foot wide streets. So take that number and just, carry it on. This is why the impact has gotten so significant. And even though, as long as Russ has been here, which is nearly 5 years, the council has reviewed different options, but this actually goes back 10 years. We've had people who have been talking about the size of special assessments for a number of years. So what we're trying to do is find a different way to fund the special assessment portion of street improvements. The city assumes a big cost already. When we special assess for residential, essentially each side of the street pays a third of the road cost for a 32-foot wide street. The city picks up the other third, plus we pick up anything wider. So if you happen to live on a street that's, say, 40 feet wide, you're still only paying a third of the 32 feet, and the city picks up that extra 8 feet between 32 and 40. But be that as it may, these costs are what we are charging you as an individual property owner. And when you get hit with an assessment like this, especially in the older areas of the city where, a house may be valued, let's say $100,000, and you get hit with an assessment for just streets that's nearly $7,500, plus you may have to pay for a water lateral, which is not included in this discussion. A water lateral that benefits your property from the main to your property, that can be $1,500, $2,500 on top of it. So when you add all those up, people are looking at assessments of like $8,000 to $10,000. We did a street a couple years ago on the west side of 41 where the lots are, everybody knows that, they're just bigger. And we had assessments that were reaching $20,000 or more. So that impact, that one-time impact, is pretty substantial. And I think from an equity standpoint, council said we want to take a look at ways we can eliminate these types of special assessments.
And just to follow up on that, one thing that's unique to Oshkosh that I have not seen in other communities, Oshkosh actually pays for the cost of the intersection of the streets, and they don't assess that. Some communities take the entire pavement project and just use that and spread their assessments based on that component. But we basically say the city picks up the cost of the intersections, which is somewhat unique to Oshkosh. So what we're looking at is a new funding approach to pay for special assessments. And it really boils down to two buckets. One is creating a vehicle registration fee, a VRF. Vehicle registration fee is the technical name for it. It's really a fee for your automobile registration. In a lot of nomenclature, a vehicle registration fee has been referred to as a wheel tax. I'm a little sensitive to the term tax, but it's really a fee based on your automobile registration. We're anticipating that with $35 per vehicle, and we got a couple other slides about that, we would generate about $1.5 million through the creation of a vehicle registration fee. Now, there are some imperfections to this, and staff's talked about it, and we've talked to council. The vehicle registration fee, because of state statutes, only apply to certain vehicles under 8,000 pounds. And vehicles over 8,000 pounds, or large trucks, are exempt by statute, and it's nothing that the city has the ability to control. That was set up by statute. In addition to that vehicle registration fee, we're looking at $750,000 to come from each of the three utilities. And the reason we're looking at this approach is when we dig up and repair a street, we also look at the condition of the utilities, as I mentioned earlier. And if we were to repair a utility that's underneath the street, we would need about an 8-foot wide trench to get down, to excavate, to take care of the repair of either a water main or sewer main or stormwater. And that cost of that 8-foot trench, on average, would equate to about $750,000 that we would need to make those costs work. So our proposal to City Council for their consideration is a combination of the vehicle registration fee and transfer from the three utilities.
And at the bottom, it says 3.75 million annually. That's pretty much the average of what we project for over a few years about how much we would have to recover annually to recover our special assessments. If we eliminate the special assessments, we got to come up with 3.75 million. So this was the combination that was done. And part of the reason, we'll get into some of the issues, because the vehicle registration fee is far from perfect, and there's a lot of concerns that people have about equity issues. And then also the utilities, but we can explain why this combination was chosen, but mathematically, we're trying to get to 3.75 million.
And again, the 3.75 million that we're looking for is based on the average of the past, but also looking at the future. And it's based on current year construction costs. So if you look at those two funding sources, again, if you put this in a percentage basis, about 42% of that funding would come from the vehicle registration fee. The other 58% would come from utilities. So roughly a 60-40 split. So a vehicle registration fee, the statute requires that it be used for transportation purposes. So when we create a vehicle registration fee, we can't use it for public safety, we can't use it for parks, we can't use it for other things. We have to use it for transportation. It's an annual fee that's added to the cost when you renew your license plates for your vehicle. When you fill out that license plate renewal on the card, if you look at it, it says, where's the vehicle kept? A lot of times that's pre-populated based on zip codes. We have a count from the state of Wisconsin that there are 46,772 cars registered in the city of Oshkosh. We assume that that's inaccurate information, but historically, in talking to other communities, once a vehicle registration fee goes into play, people that are on the fringe that might think they live in Oshkosh but actually live in a different municipality sometimes put Oshkosh down as their thing. So over time, those numbers get refined, but the numbers we got from the Department of Transportation is 46,772. And our proposal would be a $35 annual fee for Oshkosh residents.
So if you were pulling out your calculator and doing the math, 46,772 times $35 is actually a little over 1.6 million. But we wanted to be cautious so that to the degree we get vehicles that trim down from that, we wanted to have a cushion so that we don't change this for a number of years, because we want to be able to have that vehicle registration fee generate the $1.5 million that we have in the formula.
So if you're looking at vehicle registration fees in Wisconsin, right now there are 38 municipalities that use a vehicle registration fee. They range from $10 a year to $40 a year. There's 8 of them in northeastern Wisconsin, and I got the next slide shows some of those communities. In addition to municipalities doing this, counties can also enact a registration fee. Right now, there are 13 counties in the state of Wisconsin that range from $10 to $30. There are some communities in Wisconsin, most notably the city of Milwaukee, where the city has a municipal registration fee and Milwaukee County has a county registration fee. In our case, we are proposing a municipal, just for the city of Oshkosh, vehicle registration fee of $35. If you look at other communities, Appleton, Eau Claire, Green Bay, Janesville, Kaukauna, Manitowoc, and Sheboygan, here are the dollar amounts for each of those communities. Yeah, $35 would put us on the upper end. There is no maximum amount that could be generated, and we can talk about funding a little bit later, but right now, Oshkosh proposal is at $35 an annual registration fee.
You know, I mentioned earlier that, you know, the council's been wrestling with this for the last 10 years. I can tell you that both Appleton and Green Bay enacted their vehicle registration fee within the last 10 years, and it was in response to special assessments. So their vehicle registration fee is exclusively used to provide special assessment relief. That could beg the question, why is ours proposed at 35 and theirs is only proposed at 20? They've discovered that they are woefully short of meeting their special assessment coverage, and so they're visiting other options to fund their special assessments because, I mean, they're probably doing a similar volume of streets as us, so that $20 isn't coming anywhere near what they need to replace their special assessment. So I don't exactly know how they're funding it right now. They're probably borrowing a little more. We're trying to fund it in such a way that it will totally replace the special assessments, but I think it begs that question. But I'm not aware of the other ones. You know, Janesville's had theirs in place for a while, and I'm not sure, you know, what exactly they use theirs for. They might use it for operations. It has to be transportation related, as Russ said. But I'm aware that both Appleton and Green Bay have done it exclusively for special assessment relief.
And then it's $110 for you to register your car.
Yeah, I would be happy to answer your question at the end, but you're tracking the math, I would say.
Yeah, the other thing that we talked about in looking at a vehicle registration fee, and this question came up in one of our earlier sessions, is we're not looking to accelerate or delay our investment in streets. Each year, the City Council reviews a 10-year capital improvement plan that identifies projects we want to accomplish in the next 10 years. We are not looking to increase or the frequency or the length of trying to do street reconstruction. I know that was a question that came up earlier. We're looking at kind of maintaining the same level of service, doing the same amount of streets each year. So we're not looking to accelerate or either delay that with these funding proposals.
And that's why we've really been emphasizing we're trying to replace special assessments. Some cities have advertised their vehicle registration fee. You'll get more streets done. What we're saying is you'll get the special assessments eliminated. So, and some people may think that it's better to put more into the streets and continue to special assess. I can tell you I've heard every different opinion going across the board on that, and everybody has a good argument with that. It's just that as we've struggled with this for literally 10 years, we're trying to eliminate special assessments, and that has been the general direction that we've gotten from the council, to eliminate these special assessments. So I'll let Russ continue, and we'll get to your questions in a little bit. It's okay.
Thank you. We also are proposing $750,000 from each of our three utilities, water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater. And that amount is the amount that would be necessary to repair the roads after these utilities have been replaced. Our projections, in each year, the city works with financial advisor of Ellers to look at our operational cost and to look at future capital projects for each of our utilities. And we have a range between 1/4% and 1/2% that the rates would go up because of this program. The rates are not fixed rates at any one given year. For an example, this year, City Council adjusted the sanitary sewer rate at 6.75% to account for the sewer operations. If we were to add $750,000, it won't all come from rates. Some of it will come from cash reserves. but we would have to have an increase of 7%, so an increase of 0.25%. In 2025, the same thing would hold true. And looking at our future needs of our sewer utility, right now, we're projecting a potential increase in 2025 without the $750,000 would be 6.75. With this, it would be 7%. So the impact based on the additional funding for this transfer to replace special assessment ranges from 0.25 to 0.50.
And that'll vary depending on your property because each component, we use the average of $100. So the average is, if you have $100, the impact would be between 25 cents and 50 cents a month. But it depends on where your bill falls in terms of your usage. We have a 3-tiered rate system, for example, with stormwater. So if you live in an older area of town, you probably pay a lower fee than you do in a newer area of town that has the bigger lots with more impervious surface. So you might, depending on where your stormwater bill is and how much water you use, it'll vary on where that range is, and that's why we're giving you a range. And am I guaranteeing that it's going to be between 0.25 and 0.5? No. What we're saying is that range is going to be the average. Yours could go up 0.51, yours could go up 0.24. We're not saying that it's exactly that. Rates are done by a formula. What we're saying is $750,000 will get charged to each of the utilities. Then that goes into their cost factor, and that goes into the formula that's used. And the Public Service Commission, for example, they are the arbiter for utility rates for water. They don't control sewer rates or storm sewer rates, but we do follow Public Service Commission methodology. We can't decide what the water rate increase would be. The Public Service Commission would do that. They'll take a look at that $750,000 and figure out exactly what they believe our return on investment should be, as they do for all public utilities, and then they ultimately determine what the rate increase will be. But we projected it'll be in this 0.25 to 0.5 range.
So what items are going to be covered with this new funding method? It would include road and sidewalk reconstruction would be paid for with this funding. That includes sidewalk rehabilitation. So one of the issues with the sidewalk rehabilitation program, it's a very labor-intensive process to go out, inspect the sidewalks, mark the sidewalks, do the final inspections, do the individual billings. Instead of doing all those billings, this funding source would cover sidewalks as well.
You may know that the city has a program where the city's pretty much broken up into 10 different areas, and so we do one area each year. So every 10 years, we're through your neighborhood marking the sidewalks and whatnot. So it is a labor-intensive program because they might find 2 squares on my property, 3 squares on yours, 1 on a third. So we have to go through and double and triple check to make sure that. So sidewalk rehabilitation, we do about 2,000 separate properties annually. So it's very labor-intensive because even though we're just in a specific area of the city, we're all over the place. So the cost for staff to administer this program is significant, and quite honestly, we get as many complaints volume-wise on the sidewalk program as we do on the street program, and we don't do as many streets as we do streets with sidewalks on them. So, but that sidewalk, we felt it was appropriate to include that in there because of the impact on staffing and the cost of doing these spot sidewalk improvements.
So while road and sidewalk reconstruction will be covered with the new funding formula, special assessments will not go away in its entirety. There will still be special assessments, but they'll be delegated and remain in place for water, sewer, storm sewer laterals to the property. New developments, areas that are annexed into the city, and water and sewer mains have to be extended to serve that new property. Either the developer or a special assessment would be in play for those extensions. They will not be covered by this funding formula. So the funding formula is intended to repay for the special assessments of the street portions, but there still will be assessments after this program goes into play.
Like I said, with some of the street programs that we do, when we do a sewer lateral, water lateral, that can be $1,500 to $2,500. So it could be significant if we have to replace your lateral, but that is specific to the property. I did get a question, well, couldn't you just eat that cost as well? Well, we could, but then that would be adding to the 3.75 million. We're trying to limit that. The Public Service Commission doesn't allow us to use our water revenues to fund your individual lateral. Could we use property tax dollars? Yes, we could. But then it could be argued that, well, number one, it'll increase that 3.75 million. So the idea is that, and this is pretty universal, that when the water laterals are replaced, it's charged to the individual property owner. So we're proposing to continue those. And I know we don't want to create any illusion that special assessments are disappearing, but they're going to be very limited to these areas only. And when we say new development and new utility construction, those are generally on the outskirts of the city where there's absolutely no service. Think of properties that have been recently annexed into the city, or vacant properties get a new subdivision or something like that. That's what we're talking about there. But those will be special assessed to those properties because they're, lack of a better term, they're buying into the club. If you're already getting utility service, you already paid for your initial utility service, and your monthly bill pays for the redoing of those mains and everything. So you have that coming to you as a ratepayer. New developments, they haven't paid into the system yet. That's their buy-in to the larger system.
So how would we put this new funding method into effect? Basically, the legislative process is to make the transfer from the utilities into this new fund, and to create the vehicle registration fee. An ordinance has to be adopted. That requires 2 readings in front of the city council. Right now, that's scheduled to occur at the first and second meeting in February. So the first meeting will be the first reading, and the second meeting in February would be the second reading. I believe the second meeting in February is the 27th. If council wants to go down that route and follow that process, that's when it would be put into play. The vehicle registration fee requires a 90-day notice to the state. So our plan right now is to have this program go into effect on July 1st, which is basically about half of the year. But we don't know, of that 46,000 vehicles, the monthly timing of those registrations. So if you had a registration in January, you've already paid your registration for the year. If your registration comes up in August and this gets enacted, you will have another $35 added to it in August. We are making some arrangements for the cash flow for 2024 projects, but basically this would take place for any of the street reconstruction projects that begin on or after January 1 of 2024. We've received a lot of comments. The city council, I know, has received comments. We've also discussed, do we have a look-back provision for people that have already paid special assessments? We had special assessments go into play, and some of them haven't been billed yet for projects that were done in 2023. If we go back and cover 2023, how about the projects that were done in 2022? Again, we're trying to find a replacement on an annual basis for that 3.75 moving forward. If we wanted to go back and cover it, we have roughly about $7 million outstanding on special assessments that people still owe us for past billings.
But that doesn't count people who are already paid their assessments and right now owe the city nothing. So
Correct.
That's only the IOUs that we're holding right now.
And so, again, if we were to go back and have a look-back provision, that's going to cost more money, and we're going to have to find ways of coming up with that. So right now, the proposal is to do a cutoff with all projects beginning on or after January 1, 24. So if your project street was scheduled for 2024 or 2025, you would not have a street reconstruction assessment.
And I would say that the cities we've talked to that have eliminated special assessments, and I did one of these early in my career, look-back provisions, they're just feasibly just extremely difficult, and it creates more problems. And the difficult challenge for the council is, where do you cut it off? As Russ said, do you cut off at last year's projects? Then what about the year before? What about the year before? It is probably the number one complaint that we've heard from the public input sessions. And the other night, I would say about more than 3/4 of the people who were present were people who had just been recently had a project done, and they would be subject to the special assessment, plus they would assume that immediately. I'm not going to claim that this system is perfect, but I can tell you that that is pretty standard, and that's just one of the drawbacks to this. And this is far from perfect, but I think what we're trying to do is make it as fair as possible. And if you're somebody who had a project done last year, I totally understand, but this is how the best approach we believe, if we're going to do this, that we have to implement it this way.
So the next slide just kind of covered about what happens to those people that have already paid special assessments. We just talked about that. And then our last slide, again, is, as we mentioned in the beginning, the presentation itself is on the website. We've created an email account for comments. Those comments we're trying to get to as time permits. We do our best to try to get back to people with their questions. I know there's some outstanding questions that we're working on. Mark and I have been busy with meetings the last 3 days on explaining the process. City Council's interested in your comments, and anything submitted to the VRF comments will get forwarded to the City Council. So we encourage you or your friends, neighbors, relatives, if they have comments about it, to do that. But this morning, we will also take any questions that you might have and try to answer them if we haven't included them in the slide presentation to date. So with that, I think we're ready to open it up for questions.
So in order for people who may be viewing from home, or we'll have this on Oshkosh Media as well, we want to make sure that your question's heard. So if you could wait till Cammie comes to you, and we'll get through everybody. If you all have questions, we'll answer your questions. So anybody want to go first? Just raise your hand and Cammie will go. There you go.
In the "there are no stupid questions" category, what is a water lateral? How often are they replaced? Because I don't know anything, so we're just going to assume other people don't know it too.
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. A water lateral is that portion of the water line or sewer line or storm sewer line that goes from the main in the middle of the street. So what collects and either collects or collects sewage or delivers water to your residence. The lateral is what goes right into your property. In the sewer case, the sewer lateral goes all the way to your house. For the water, it goes from the main up to your property line. There's a term that we call curb stop. It's that little turn on, turn off valve that's right there, usually around the sidewalk. So that lateral charge goes there. How often? Generally, it goes with about the replacement of the mains. Now, some people may have a problem with, they can get damaged prior to the life of the main going. The mains, we've got sewer mains that we're replacing this year that still date back to the 1800s. Most of them actually date back to the 1920s, so they're 100 years old. My guess is the lateral may have been replaced once in that lifetime, so 50 to 75 years is not unusual.
But normally, it's like, I think the normal expectation, and from an accounting terminology, we would depreciate that over a 20 to 50 years cycle. But kind of going off on a sidetrack just briefly, and it's not for our discussion this morning, but there's also laterals that have lead in them. and we're trying to replace that because lead is not a good product to be exposed to. And so we have a separate program that if that lateral is a lead lateral and you meet certain requirements, we'll help you replace that lateral sooner. So
And
that
the service,
And the service.
And the service that goes from, say,
curb.
the curb stop into your property, that's a concern that is separate.
But that's
It's a
all
legitimate issue.
private property. That's not a municipal utility asset.
Thanks.
So we're old, so I'll probably.
Hang on for the microphone, Carmen.
Actually, I feel better.
Yeah, please. No, but use the microphone, please.
So the other question that, as you were, well, a couple of them, this town loves to talk about water bills, as you know.
Oh, yes.
And they don't seem to have a good grasp on water bills, sewer bills, and the minute you say water, they lose their mind. So if we were to eliminate that water issue and bump up $40 for the wheel tax, thereby eliminating the water talk at all, which causes people to get out pitchforks, what's the math look like? Is that a viability? Is that possible?
Well, it depends on your opinion on the vehicle registration fee. Here's why I think that I would not recommend that. Because that $5 is getting charged to individuals that are paying the vehicle registration fee. So if you have, now most vehicles are under 8,000 pounds, but larger trucks that do the most damage to the pavement are not paying a dime. And I think that that's an unfair factor, and the council has heard from me about my concerns about the vehicle registration fee. The reason that we did the combination of utilities and vehicle registration fee is to spread the responsibility for that around. Just one case in point, and it's why I wouldn't recommend adding more to it, because all you're doing is burdening those people who are paying the vehicle registration fee. I think it would be unfair to them, to be honest with you. But I appreciate the question, because without the question, I can't explain that. One of the things particular to Oshkosh is every community has churches and schools and stuff like that, which are all exempt from the vehicle registration fee, and they're exempt from property taxes. On top of those institutions that exist everywhere, we have a great deal of non-taxable property in the city. The university, the prison, the resource center, the mental health institute. We have a plethora of non-taxable properties. There have been suggestions, why don't you put it all on the property tax roll? And we could very well do that. But then non-taxable properties would not be paying anything. And I think these state facilities that are paid with state taxes should be shared with everybody in the state, not just Oshkosh residents. So the idea behind spreading it between two different funding sources was an intentional act by council, because isolated, just charging it all to the utilities wouldn't make sense either. Charging it all to vehicle registration fee wouldn't make sense. So the idea of the laterals are very infrequent. So that's part of it. You are correct also that vehicle or utility charges are a sensitive issue. And we've got a lot of improvements that we've had to put into our system that our rates are going to continue to go up. I don't want to sugarcoat that at all. What we're trying to do is isolate what the impact of that 750,000 will be to each of the individual utilities, and that's why we gave you a range to give you a lot more answer than your question, but I think giving you the context, and that's why I really enjoy. This doesn't seem like a huge crowd. We probably got about 8, 9 people. Your questions help us improve how we can communicate, and I know with Carmen that's an important one to you. So thank you for your question.
One last
and
question.
I get one more. See, I talked long enough.
Yeah, well, oh, no, this was already on the deck.
Okay,
All right. And I'm muddying the water, probably, but, and I don't know how our bus system runs. Back home, what we did is a portion of each bus pass or each ride was used for roads. Is that, so I don't even know if, how significant that will be. Is it just a token with people saying, well, what about the people that they take a bus and they can't blah, blah, blah. So is that something that's been talked about? Is a portion going into a fund that then helps to offset this?
Our transit charges are amongst the lowest in the state, and we're proud of that because for people who can't afford vehicles, that is, for some people, that's their only source of transportation. And the taxpayers of Oshkosh subsidize transit to the tune of about $700,000-800,000, and I'm doing that from memory. If Russ pulled out the budget, but we do a substantial property tax subsidy to transit. So we'd first have to cover that subsidy before we'd say, why don't the bus riders pay into it? Again, it comes to an equity issue, and I thought where you were going, because I've heard people say this before, some people have argued that we should charge more of a vehicle registration fee so that it would help subsidize transit even more. So depending on your view of public transit, you might have a different opinion on that, but we're already subsidizing transit, so to have that go into that fund would, it would kind of defeat the purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thanks.
Your ridership is also significantly lower here than where I came from.
Yeah, and see, then I would go to that point, we need to do a better job of encouraging more people to do transit. And I shouldn't have answered your question until you had the mic.
No, I just, we all have shared experiences from where we lived before. And
Yes,
so when we share our experiences, but preface by saying, I know nothing, I've never even been on a bus here, then your explanation made very good sense. So thank you.
thanks, Carmen.
So what's the mic?
I'll go. Thank you. And Russ, I know we talked about this a little bit ahead of time, and I'm closer to understanding what you're saying, but I'm going to try it one more time, and if it doesn't work, we can do it off the mic
Okay.
also. So my question in general has been, how does that $750,000 per utility get generated? Because when you say it's a .025, you say it's a 0.25% increase, and I'm looking at the billables for 2021. So it's on the charges for services. A 0.25% increase of the $12.3 million we bill for stormwater only does not equal $750,000, correct?
Correct.
So what you're saying is there's a line item you can enter $750,000 in on this spreadsheet somewhere. This is the expenses and revenues and operating expenses, and then a fund ending and beginning balance. You're saying you can take $750,000 per each utility, add it to this operational spreadsheet somewhere, and it spits out what equates to a 0.25% increase per utility per user.
Correct.
That's awesome.
So what goes into play, and I tried to explain this a little bit, Chris, before.
Did I do better this time than last time? Is that making more sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, that's
so-
that's magic to the general public. That is pure magic to us.
I need everybody to understand that this 0.25% to 0.5% does not generate, in today's dollars, $750,000 on revenue.
Correct.
What it does is we take the $750,000, we roll it into all of the projects we're going to be financing. Some of those projects are financed with the issuance of debt. So when we look at our utilities, we actually have a cash flow analysis or pro forma looking at what our rate's going to be, not only for next year, but out 10 years. And we do that in conjunction with our capital improvement plan and all the other improvements being done to our utilities. We've done one without the $750,000. We've done another cash flow analysis with the $750,000. There is not a flat percentage increase for any one utility. And I can go through some examples. But we, based on the investment we're making in the assets, are looking at a differential of about 2.5 to 1.5 percent of 1% into the future. Now, that percentage is not known for water. To complicate and to help answer your question, we're looking at other, and I think the community knows that we've been looking at other improvements to our water distribution system. We inform the public, and everybody, I think, should understand that we get our source of water is from Lake Winnebago. We pump in water, we treat water. We are one of the probably 10 communities in Wisconsin that rely on surface water. And when I say surface water, I mean lakes and rivers to provide portable water for everybody to consume. And that, there's a treatment process with that. And some of that evolves on how do we treat the water and how do we store the water to do that treatment process. And that all gets factored into our cost of the utilities. And we've gotten, as Carmen mentioned before, we've gotten a lot of criticism because we went from quarterly billing to monthly billing. The billings have gone up, but so has the cost of treatment. Whether it's the treatment of clean water coming into your faucet and for you to consume, or to treat the water that comes out, and when you flush the toilet, we have to treat it. And stormwater is becoming more and more regulated. I can tell you that I worked in municipalities for 40 years. What we do with stormwater has changed in that 40 years dramatically. We used to have pipes, and unfortunately, my family and my experience is, my dad worked in a paper mill, and paper mill and industry and even municipalities would dump raw sewage into rivers. And we no longer do that, we treat it. Stormwater, we now have to remove sediments before it gets floated down the inlets into our lakes and rivers. So that cost of treatment is borne by those utilities. And there's no hiding it. That cost of doing that continues to escalate. So we have to take a comprehensive look at not only this project, but all the other projects we're doing. But I can tell you today that the difference between the $750,000 coming out of the utilities and not having that $750,000 coming out of the utilities is between 0.25 and 0.5 of 1%. Now, that's going to be different when we give assumptions about a $100 utility bill. That's for all three utilities. That may not be the same for every resident. We have a fixed charge and we have a volumetric charge. We charge our volume based on cubic feet, every 100 cubic feet. And we've gotten a lot of criticism because some people, because we round off to the nearest 100 cubic feet in our billing, that sometimes when you have fluctuations in billing, you might not have fluctuations in the bill amount, because if you use 2.5 cubic feet versus 3.4 cubic feet, you're getting billed for 3 cubic feet. It's just a rounding error in the billing system. We just bill by 100 cubic feet. So the impact to each resident on that is going to be a little bit different. The impact on our larger consumers are going to be a little bit different. And that gets back to the issue that Mark talked about before, is trying to make sure that we don't burden everybody with a vehicle registration fee, that we have some utility support so that the burden is spread across the entire community and not just residential property.
I can tell you that with, we've made this presentation to the business community, and the business community is probably more concerned about the stormwater fee than the other utilities. They're concerned about all of them, but stormwater is by far the one for them because they get charged on impervious surface. We all get charged one of three rates as a resident, but they get charged based on like every 2,800 feet of impervious surface, they pay the same as you pay. So if they've got 20,000 square feet, they're paying like 10 times more than what you are. So they're very sensitive to the stormwater rates. And they're concerned that the utilities are taking on a bigger burden, and why shouldn't it go to property taxes? Why shouldn't it go to a vehicle registration fee? Well, frankly, a lot of large businesses with big vehicles that do, we all know, the biggest vehicles do the most damage to the pavement. We have to own, as residents, that the width of a road, that a 2 or 3 lane road is done because there's a lot more cars. So the cars cause the need to make the roads wider, but the trucks make it the need to have it deeper. And they don't even pay the vehicle registration fee. So what's the replacement for their special assessment charges? And the utilities was a big part of that. So you'll pay a portion, but also the businesses will pay a portion. And it was really just which mix is the best. And every one of you could come up with a different conclusion. And I just use this for illustration purposes. We had put together about 12 different options, and there were mix and matches of different things that council looked at when they were reviewing this. This proposal was none of those 12, and we called it it was option 13, because they said, what if we did a little bit of this and a little bit of that? And they ultimately came up with a little bit of utility, a little bit with vehicle registration fee. But it's because they want to offset all the imperfections that each one has. Each idea has its own set of imperfections. We're just trying to minimize those negative impacts. Chris?
That's good.
Long answer to.
No, that's great.
a
I was just
simple
going to say,
question.
and
I'm
Mark,
sorry.
you asked me before the meeting if I trust you, and I do trust you. You're my friend. However, I hope that you can see from the general public's perspective, Russ's explanation was awesome. I understood maybe 10% of it. But I believe everything you're saying. So that's my point. I mean, you have to understand that from the general public perspective, that part of it is hard to understand because it is difficult to explain. It just is.
It is.
Now, I get it.
Yeah.
There's a formulaic equation in there somewhere that utilities can generate those funds in a different manner than 1-by-1 ratio, essentially. So for a different group of people, because it's not a question to you, it's a question to councilors, if it's that easy to generate, I mean, if it's 25 cents per $100 and 50 cents per $100 to generate the amount of money we're talking about here, that might be a great method to do more of that, because over time, that's a lot less impactful. But again, that's not a question for you two, that's a question for council to look at, or for whomever.
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah, go
One of
ahead.
the questions we got at some of the meetings was, is this going to take care of it and never have to increase? And somebody said, can you guarantee we'll never increase this?
No.
Thank you. I mean, and it's not, I'm not trying to be cagey about it. Take a look at that chart that we did with the cost of road project. It's gone up 150% in 15 years. Inflation is going to continue. It'll go up and down, but inflation is going to continue. So I can't guarantee that. But as time goes on, I'm concerned with relative to the vehicle registration fee. Communities have not increased their vehicle registration fees much. Russ found a few, but they're a little reluctant to increase that because that does require 2 readings of an ordinance. To raise our utility rates, the council, it's a simple resolution, they adopt it. For the vehicle registration fee, it's a much more public, visible process, and the hesitancy of a council to increase that, I think, could result in, where are we going to get the money from? It may come from the utilities, or we may have to yet come up with a third option. Appleton's actually looking at what's called a transportation utility fee. And I know Chris is aware of this, because that's what the council rejected 5 years ago. It happened to be Russ's first meeting. And so Russ is retiring next month, and he's bookended his entire career with us on this issue, and we're still trying to get closure on it after all these years. But don't do it because we want you to feel sorry for Russ. Do it because we're trying to get the best option. So, again, long answer to short question.
It's a great
Chris.
point also, and I mean to interrupt you, Russ, because you can let this part go. My point was mainly that if you ask, the average utility bill of a residence in Oshkosh is $150 per month.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask those people if they'd rather pay 70 cents than $1.40 and make a lot of this go away now, the laterals or the wheel tax or whatever, they would probably say yes, because it's so low impact. However, for the future is great too. So I'll digress. My second question is way easier. And Mark, you just made the same point, 2 readings to get this done. We have not legislative boards and commissions in the city. We have advisory boards and commissions in the city. This is a huge discussion. I know that most of those advisory boards don't automatically trigger anything because they're not legislative, but we have a history of things that require a plan commission go to plan commission before council sees them. This, to me, strikes me as a delightful issue that the transportation board should hear before council. 7 people making this decision for everybody when a total of 20-some people have showed up to the public hearings this week is not a lot of representation. You have a transportation board for that purpose. More input from them would be awesome. So I know that's not triggered by anything, that's not a requirement of you guys. It would be awesome, I don't know who the transportation liaison on council is, but I would hope that they would have made that recommendation to their board and commission ahead of time, because that's why they are the liaison to that. But from my personal opinion, it's a big decision, and boards and commissions would be great to hear from on this.
Sure. And I think, just to kind of piggyback on that, we have had a long-range finance committee, and the initial vehicle, the transportation utility concept was presented to that committee, and another informal committee looked at alternatives to that. I know you were. I know. That
Chris would remember that committee.
transportation utility. We are going to present the same presentation and information to our long-range finance committee in February. I can't speak for the transportation. They tend to focus more on traffic issues than utility things. I'm just
Traffic, transit, they don't deal with financial issues, but traffic, transit, parking, those are the issues they deal with.
And the only other comment I would have to that, your line of comments and questions, was, we've been very sensitive to utility rates, and I've heard it from public, I've heard it from customers, I've heard it from council members, and we've talked to the chamber folks about it. We have relied quite a bit on debt to issue capital projects. I mean, it's water and sewer is really easy because you can quantify the pipes and the cost of replacing a pipe and those type of things. Stormwater, it's really hard because we actually devalue property. We buy property, we make a detention basin, we dig a hole, we put water in there. We're sensitive to the rates. We've used debt to help finance those projects because in order to address all of the issues related to our residents dealing with stormwater runoff, not only quantity but quality, we've had to issue debt. And we have built up some pretty good cash reserves in those utility funds, and we're not a bank. But what we do is we try to have a rate that we feel is fair and reasonable. Some people would argue they're too high. But we kind of look at all of our costs, operational and future capital projects and investment in capital projects, to come up with a blended rate to do that. So we're trying to do a balanced approach. I think one council member earlier this week referred to it as a buffet, or going through a buffet line and take a little bit of each. That's the approach we've had. We heard fairly loud and clear from the 7 council members that special assessments is not the preferred method of moving forward in our community. What can we do? The easiest thing for us is to do nothing. The easiest approach is to continue the way we've always done business. We're trying to come up with a new way of helping our residents do it in a blended method. And you could argue that piece of the pie should be more than 60-40 one way or the other. That's a good argument, a good viewpoint. We're trying to present a balanced approach to finding a solution to do away with special assessments.
I could find a different way to say the same thing, but I think we need more questions asked than us giving you answers. So, well, if we could, anybody, Chris, you done?
I'm done.
Yeah. Oh, Burke? Okay.
I have the microphone now. First of all, thanks for working on this, and I thank the council for working on that. I thank you for having the sessions here. I think there was a lot of confusion about the utility thing. It's hard to understand. I wrote notes to all the council members, and not one replied. I think it's because the council members don't understand. I'm a little concerned, like Chris, how fast this is going. I think a lot of it's in response to Clareville Road, which is kind of interesting, that it's happening so fast.
I don't think so, but that's...
Or people leaving the council and want to get it done before they leave. There's a quick and dirty that appears to be happening right now. And that's what Chris mentioned, so do I. So a few specific questions. So on the wheel tax, I know all the problems. You did a nice job of explaining some of the problems. A couple specific questions on those. Are tax exempt property exempt from the wheel tax? I thought I heard you say.
Well, they don't often have many vehicles that are available to be taxed or
No.
have the fee in the first place.
Can I just
I
interject?
just asked that,
Yeah, can I interject just one quick point?
yes or no is really the answer. They are exempt from it or they're not.
They are exempt. All state-owned vehicles, municipal-owned vehicles, county-owned vehicles are exempt from the vehicle registration, I said voter, vehicle registration fee. So the answer to your question, yeah, they're exempt.
Okay, that's all.
Yeah.
That's a,
For nonprofits?
Yeah, see, some nonprofits might have to pay, that's what I was answering. So Russ answered half, I answered the other half, yeah.
But if a nonprofit has a standard passenger van or vehicle under 8,000 pounds, they would have to pay. If it's a regular issued motor, it's not based on the property, it's based on the vehicle. And there are some, and this question came up yesterday, there are some vehicles that are exempt. Collector vehicles, for example, are exempt by state statute. We have no control over that. Motorcycles are not going to be collecting the $35. What's the term for the three-wheel cycles?
Those are included.
Auto cycles are included. Motorcycles are excluded. So there's all these fine lines.
which is all the problem with the wheel tax that we've looked at.
Exactly, and I think that's the most important point. It's not a perfect collection, which is kind of going to Carmen's question, why would we not go more? 35 is pretty high for a lot of people that aren't going to be paying it.
Okay. Another question, just on the wheel tax. Is there an administrative cost by the state?
Yes, there is.
17 cents.
So how much of
17
that
cents.
35 goes to the state?
17 cents of each.
Just 17 cents, okay, all right.
No,
per
each- per vehicle.
So your first 17 cents you pay, the 35, the state keeps.
So and I missed this, Burke, but this is a good point. There's no administrative cost for us to collect this. The state of Wisconsin adds it to your license plate renewal or new license plate, and they collect it, and then they send a check to the municipality minus the 17 cents, so we'd get 34, whatever that.
Yeah, so that's what we
13
factored in
cents.
as well. Like we said, we did the math knowing we're getting 34.83 per vehicle, not 35, but again, those are details.
Okay, you covered my questions with respect to the utilities and the .25. Is there a cap on the 750 per year? I mean, on the
Short answer is yes.
750,000 out of each one?
Short answer is yes, because what we did, well, Russ, you figured it out. Yeah, I'm going to be faking it if I'll let Russ answer that
Well,
question.
Well, my answer would have been, there is not a cap. The 750,000 came across as the average cost of 8 feet of pavement with the assumption that we have to excavate or cut open 8 feet of the road surface to get down to dig. As construction costs increase, the finance director, whoever that may be at the time, the city manager and the city council will have to look at whether 750,000 is adequate funding. And that, I can tell you, over the cost of increases with construction materials, that number is going to change. I would imagine it's going to go up. So there's no cap on it, but 750 is the estimate we have with today's construction costs to replace 8 feet of pavement in order to get to the utility underneath it.
That gets at the heart of my question. When it's first passed, will it be 750? And if it's going to be raised from 750 out of each, will it have to come back to the council in that? Or is council passing whatever it takes out of each of these, out of each one of these each year?
No, it would have to
Without
be
a
passed by council, and the council has to do that through their budget process. So
Okay.
each year, we will be committed to reviewing the funding on this, the funding of the utilities, the dollar amount of the vehicle registration. We would have to make each one of those decisions independently. So if costs are going up and that vehicle registration fee goes from 35 to 40 or whatever dollar amount it would go to, that would require new legislation by the city council.
Okay, that's my question.
The
On
utility rates-
I understand that on
The
the
utility
wheel
rates
tax.
will be covered through the budget process, and the council ultimately approves the budget for all three utilities and the city operations.
Okay, another question maybe. In the first year, you're only looking at collecting basically for half a year. How are you funding the other 1.8 million,
Yeah.
1.9 million, and where's the money coming from to fund that?
Sure. When we put together our initial capital improvement, and I think the two streets next year or this year are Cherry and Wagoo.
And, yeah, and then 7th, south side, 7th, 8th, over there. So there's like
Michigan,
3 parts.
Iowa, yeah.
Michigan, Iowa, stuff like
Okay,
that.
How does Clairville Road fit into this?
It doesn't at all.
It doesn't at all?
No, because that's new utilities. That's why, that's one of the exemptions. Clairville Road, that's why I disagreed with you. Clairville Road was brand-new utilities. So that is a utility charge for, and those will continue into the future.
Okay,
So
so,
this is, that's why I disagree with you, because
okay, so we're not paying anything for Clairville Road?
Correct,
Okay, that's my question, when you said that.
yeah.
Okay, and so again, now,
To answer your question.
how are you funding the
Yeah, to
the first
answer
year?
your question,
When you're
Mark?
only collecting half of it?
Yes, and that's why I made the comment on the slide that we're taking into consideration for this year's projects, primarily Wagoo, Cherry, and the other streets. The amount that we normally would assess, we're going to borrow for this year, but we're going to take the money out of the fund as the fund accumulates. So there is some additional borrowing that's going to occur for street construction projects in 2024, that initially were going to be funded by special assessments, but would be funded by debt, and that debt repayment will come, some of that will come out of the vehicle registration fee in the future.
So it's just
So-
a
so Ashley-
one-time borrowing.
So we've accounted
But you're
for,
going to spread that over that
Yes.
fee over time? Okay,
Yes.
So that won't be natural borrowing, which will be put on the taxpayers?
correct.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, no, good question. Thank you.
Nobody on this side of the room has asked a question yet, so, okay, we'll work our way over to you.
Okay, so January 1, any new special assessment, the property owner is only going to be responsible for the laterals, no responsibility for the road work, the construction?
That's the whole intent. You summarized it very well.
Why are we not putting a cap on the special assessments? If it's 10,000, they get capped at 5,000, the homeowner is paying that amount.
Yeah.
Why are we not doing that type of a fee versus, from this point on, they're being charged nothing?
Let me make sure I understand.
All the taxpayers are
Yeah,
going to be paying for their special assessments.
that's, the council direction was to eliminate the road reconstruction assessments. That is not a universal opinion amongst council members. In fact, there's a council member who is stepping down, who's immediately behind you, that I think would be very sensitive or receptive to your comments. But ultimately, one of the questions posed to council is, do you want to eliminate the road assessments or just partially? Do you want to do a cap? We talked about caps. We actually talked about floors, about, having the first 5,000 covered. There was one suggestion from a certain council member who is, I'm looking right over your shoulder and I can see him, and that suggestion was, let's cap it. And I can give you the different reasons. I think a certain council member has a certain level of opinion on that, and we've had many discussions about that, but I think he'll say he lost out on that argument.
Okay, so what were the other options that you were looking at taxation?
Well, one of them was to go completely property tax. I mean, that is a legitimate option. One was to institute a transportation utility fee, which has gotten some mileage elsewhere in the state, but the state chambers of commerce have vehemently fought that. There's one that's kind of in place for about 5 years now, maybe longer than that, in Neenah, was based on something that was actually the one that was rejected by our council back in 2019. Russ, there's a few other options, but then there were a lot of variations on those, like put more weight on a transportation utility fee or put more on property tax. One was to lower the assessments. I remember I talked about the third. We talked about 20% to each side and 60% in the middle. I mean, literally any of those variations, it's really only limited by your imagination.
See, fair and equitable to me is not taxing my water bill anymore. In my 35 years of home ownership, and I know this isn't a great section, I've paid 3 assessments. Just got done paying off the last assessment in 2020. How is it fair to me, again, not a great session, but the homeowner, the property owner needs to be held responsible for some of the road work being done, not just the storm sewer laterals. I paid for all of that. I think your balance, I don't really have an issue with the wheel tax because I do drive around town. But I do have an issue, it's an attack for me on my very limited budget that I get per month to be now taxed more for water. It's not fair to me.
Thank you for your comments, Lori.
Here, I can take that.
Over here, yeah, because the lady at the end.
So I live on Clairville Road. We met.
Yes.
So am I looking at $170,000 that I need to come up with?
Those utility charges were approved by the council. We met, and I owe you a letter on that issue. The council has asked us, in addition to this issue, can we look for ways to provide relief for those types of situations? But they are totally unrelated to this.
Okay. Okay. I just heard it come up before, so that's.
No, that's okay, and that's why, I was like, and I kept looking over at him and you, because
I
I was
know,
like. yeah,
I'm just.
That's okay. Thank you for coming.
Yes.
But that's a separate issue, because
Okay.
those are not classified as road improvements. Now, there's road restoration associated with that new utility, but that's a totally different issue. And as the slide indicates, those will continue. But you've got some very unique situations out there that I know council is aware of them. Carmen, I waited long enough, and now we're back to you.
So just to confirm, this is not anything that voters vote on. We have voted for a council, and we have entrusted them with the wisdom to make decisions on our behalf. So this process of what we're doing is to give you feedback for the council. Hopefully, others who aren't here will look at this and have a better understanding. But at the end of the day, we don't really have any power in this issue.
Yeah, ultimately, your elected officials will make this decision.
My comment that people will hopefully hear is that maybe this is going to increase voter turnout. Come to these meetings. Don't come to just this. Come to council meetings. Come and be a part of it. And then the last thing is, I'm really glad I came. I learned lots of new information. I think you're both excellent communicators at answering questions, being on the hot seat, not losing your cool, blah, 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 blah. But most people didn't come. Most people aren't going to look at this forum. I think that the communication issues need to be dealt with in a more diverse way. A lot of different ways, whether they're things in the Herald, whether they're humorous YouTube videos. I think in so often, not just Oshkosh, but all government doesn't do a great job of communicating. So if we've learned nothing from this and the water, is you just got to do better at getting out to the people in a whole bunch of different ways, and not on the back of a water bill, which nobody reads.
Thank you, Carmen. Those are wonderful
Right?
comments.
So I think that's, this is really good to be here for those of us who are here, but that.
You're getting a guy ready to retire and make a comment, and so I can't control everything he says these days, because I can't fire him.
You can if you want. No, I think we as staff, and I'm pretty sure I can speak for the elected officials, they were pretty clear when we were talking about different ways of funding special assessments, that we needed to do a better job at communicating with our residents. We rely a lot on social media, we rely on a lot of different ways, but we also rely on good old-fashioned talking to one another and expressing opinions in a respectful manner. But in all due respect, City Council directed the city manager and indirectly me to come and present this. And we've tried to do a couple of different things. We tried to do an evening meeting. We tried to do it live on Facebook, and all of these have been recorded so that we get the information to the elected officials. There are some states in our country that have the ability to have a lot more referendums on different issues. We can negotiate whether governance by referendum is a way we want to govern. I don't think that's a appropriate way. I think we have a great system here in Oshkosh and in the state where we elect people to make decisions and informed decisions. And in order to make informed decisions, we need input. And today is just one of those mechanisms to gather input. All of the comments will be shared with the elected officials. Some of them have taken time to appear, and not only at the presentation today or the presentation on Tuesday, but I know that some council members and some candidates also logged into the Facebook presentation yesterday. So they all have had an opportunity to witness your comments and questions firsthand. We'll do our best to summarize and present all that information to them. But yes, ultimately, it's the city council that would have to make that decision. So thank you.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. The input you've provided, will absolutely report back. One of our council members is here. I'm certain that Mr. Ford will be reporting back to his colleagues as well. We still have the first reading of this ordinance, which is really just to publicly introduce it, will be February 13th. So that's about 12 days from now. And then the council will not take...
Valentine's Day gift to us.
Well, no, it'll be more of a closer to St. Patrick's Day, because they won't take final action. The earliest they can take final action would be February 27th at that meeting. So, and between now and then, I would encourage you, if you have any additional questions, we're happy to answer those. If you have any comments, if you send that, that we have
There you go,
VRF
Jim.
comments at oshkoshwi.gov, anything you send to there, we will make sure that the city council members receive a copy of those comments or questions so that they're aware of what's going out there. But, I mean, we've been able to summarize, after the meetings, we talk about the different questions we were asked and what are the most common things and things like that. So we'll continue to do that. And I know there's a gentleman in the back, don't worry, I got you. I thought I was done, but then I saw you, so please go ahead and ask your question.
I've got a few questions, if that's all right.
That's quite all right.
Now, as she had mentioned that you guys, we're not doing this as a referendum.
Correct.
Because now I see this has got the online support, you've got the two forums here. Why would this not go to a referendum if it's got that much, pushback, I guess, that you've opened this up for more questions? It's not just, your small little, I'm going to raise, the tax rate by a little bit. This seems like a little bigger thing that I think should go to a referendum and allow the people to vote on it in April to maybe make a difference of what they really want and give the solutions that you guys can bring. Why is that not an option?
That's ultimately a council decision, but I think that's a philosophical discussion that you can have with anybody in town. But the council has directed us to go about council action.
The council has directed you, but who's
Correct.
directing the council if they're voting on our behalf?
The people who elect them.
Yeah, again, why wouldn't they bring that up to a referendum?
That you'll have to ask them.
Okay, I'll be asking them. So with the special assessments that you had, shown, those numbers are fixed, right? You divide those up by your, middle of the street, size of the street, a third here, here, and here. Those go up with, the price of everything else. When you do your wheel tax, those are arbitrary. You can change that whenever you want and change that to a value that you want to do, correct?
We're going to have to evaluate that. We believe we can, about 3 to 5 years, we can keep that as is, and then we'll have to evaluate it at that time.
But you could change that at a value that's different than the rate of the construction for the special assessments. Special assessments is a set price, am I right? You get
Special
X amount of dollars to fix X amount of road. You've showed that.
It's usually based on the cost So
Yes.
we showed you that slide that shows how the costs have gone up.
Yes,
So-
it's based on that cost, and that cost is a fixed cost, where the special assessment, your wheel tax is now a adjustable.
Yeah.
Can I just?
Yeah, we have to evaluate that. We'll have to evaluate that. Are you asking me, could it go up?
Could it go up in a different proportion than what the construction costs actually reflect?
I would say that's not the intent.
Not the intent. It's a yes or no question. Could it go up? Yes.
It could go up. I can't guarantee you that nothing will go up. I can't guarantee you that inflation's not going to happen, but.
Well, inflation's going to happen, and we pay it in the special
Yeah.
assessments.
Oh, I don't want to get argumentative.
Oh,
with
no,
you.
no, no. I'm trying to get an answer out of you.
Life.
Let me ask you, let's move on. If this is, an answer, and this is kind of, looks like our voice doesn't really matter because they've already made up their mind of what they want to do, this is going to pass. But have they thought about you showed 8 other municipalities that use a wheel tax. What are the other municipalities that don't use a wheel tax that obviously can afford it? What are they doing?
Some use property taxes, some use special assessments. It's about half use special assessments.
Was special assessments not working? Is that why we're changing it? What was wrong with it?
That was our slide earlier in the show. So that was, the cost had been going up, and I don't want to put Mr. Tower on the spot, but Mr. Tower will recall when he was mayor, there was a young lady up here who had just purchased a house, and it was on Harney. Remember that, Burke? And that person was inconsolable, and the council looked and said, we need to take a look at this. That was 2013. So the council's been wrestling with this issue for years.
Yes.
And so what's the solution? One of the solutions, as Russ said, you can do nothing. And 5 years ago, when I thought that council was prepared to institute a transportation utility fee. So you say it's fixed. I thought it was pretty certain 5 years ago, and it did not happen. So I don't share your optimism until the council votes
I'm not
on it.
saying it's fixed and like it's not going to change. The price of construction goes up, so your price of special assessment will go up according to what it costs for the concrete and everything else you put in there. Whereas your wheel tax is more of what you guys want to try and change because we're losing money in this, whatever. Let's add this into our sewer, into our water. So now all these other fees go up instead of keeping the special assessment for what they're intended to do to fix the actual streets in front of the properties of the people that own them.
I'm going to let Russ has been poking at me to want to
That's okay.
answer.
I think there's a couple things that I'd like to comment on real quickly. And again, if we could put the slide up on the cost, these are average costs for paving portions only. The city council has adopted a policy on how much they're going to assess. And one of the options was to change that. Right now, in general terms, it's a third on one side of the street, a third on the other side of the street, and the city bears a third, on average. And there's a lot of different exceptions for that, depending on the zoning of the property, that complicates it. We looked at changing those percentages. Those percentages are based on construction numbers, and those numbers have gone up. So the people that were assessed back in 2008 versus 2023 are paying different amounts based on the assessment rate. So they're not fixed rates, okay? The slide here is the average. So to say that these assessments are fixed is not a great.
I'm not saying they're fixed. I'm saying they are reflective of an actual cost of the actual project versus the cost of your wheel tax is adjustable. Does that make sense?
Correct.
So
I
I'm
would
not
agree
denying
with
that the price goes up. I'm not denying that these numbers are right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you on that. I'm saying because the numbers go up, the special assessment, yes, will go up per the construction costs. But when you have a wheel tax, that's something that you got, and I'm going to say wheel tax and your other fees for your stormwater and your water, those can be changed arbitrarily. That may not reflect what the construction costs go up. And you guys, and the council, I'm sorry, not you guys, the council can change that a lot more manipulatively than they would a straight construction cost for a special assessment.
They can. But
Okay, that's what I need, that's all I
But
need to know.
let me just explain the process a little bit more, because I think I'm using this as an educational point. Each year, we do two documents that are very important from my perspective as a finance director, is to look at the annual operating budget for the city and to look at our capital improvement plan for the city. Our capital improvement plan, we do a 10-year look into the future of what projects we need to do and why we need to do them. Each year, the city council reviews those capital projects and say, we agree with this plan, we don't agree with this plan, we think this should be part of the plan, we think this should be removed from the plan. And we've had that, where certain streets have been proposed to be done, other streets came across based on somebody else's opinion on the street, so we've added to it. So we look at both the CIP and the operating budget. Those are very important processes. The CIP has multiple reviews. It also has open discussion on the improvement plan itself. The budget has a process that involves a formal public hearing and discussions, including 2 all-day work sessions with the city council to review all of our operations, and those are part of that. And this fee is going to be part of that process.
That's yesterday's note. So.
Yeah, so it's not just this one snapshot in time. It's not something that happened overnight. As the city manager's alluded, this thing has been talked about for a number of years. The point of the issue is special assessments have becoming a larger burden on some of our older homes in some of the central part of the cities.
Then cap them.
We've talked about that. And at this point,
Have you tried it?
the 7 elected officials have directed staff to come up with a plan to eliminate the road reconstruction projects.
And then again, I guess if they're not listening to what the people want, that's why we have the forum.
Okay.
That the elections will reflect them accordingly.
Correct.
I have one more question then.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I know this is not a perfect thing, having a wheel tax, but what about people that have multiple vehicles? And like, I have classic cars. I don't drive them year round. They don't have collector plates. I want to have a vanity plate, so I don't get to be exempt from that. So I'm not driving that car more than a half dozen times a year, but I have to pay your wheel tax for it. And if I've got multiple vehicles, I can only drive one at a time. Why am I paying multiple wheel tax on that?
The vehicle registration fee statute dictates how that works.
Well, I get that. I understand that's DOT side. But you got to consider that into what you guys are proposing, going, hey, maybe it's not really fair for everybody because there's a lot of people that own multiple vehicles that can't drive them. Was that considered?
Short answer is yes. And this is coming from a guy who has 3 boys still at home, and they each have a car. I know the impact this is going to be on.
That's 3 vehicles, 3 boys, they can all drive. Am I right?
I
I'm
understand
one
that.
person with multiple vehicles.
Your point's made. I can't, the short answer is it was factored in. All right, anybody else? And even if we, adjourn, I'm happy to stick around. Russ is happy to stick around. We did that the other night. We can chat, and just have, if you want to have a question that a little more specific to you or something like that. Do you have a question?
I do.
Okay, please.
I was wondering about the 5% tax, like for when EAA is here, like a 5% sales tax.
Sales tax.
Oh, that's a good question.
I think that with the traffic that we get from EAA, that generates a whole lot of money.
It sure does.
And why is
Sure, I'll
that-
start.
You're going to get me all worked up because
Okay,
I love your question, but it gets me worked up because we get nothing. We get none of that.
That's what I kind of figured.
Yeah, it drives me crazy, but
So-
I'll let Russ, because Russ
No,
is
no,
doing
no,
it calmer than I do these days.
That is an excellent question, because actually that question came up through our Facebook presentation yesterday. In Wisconsin, with very rare exceptions, I think there's a handful that have a municipal sales tax if you're in a tourism area. And unfortunately, Oshkosh is not classified as a tourism area. Just
Okay, yeah.
bear with me, I'm trying to answer your question.
Okay, yeah.
are allowed to do local sales tax. Pretty much the blanket statement is municipalities can't have a sales tax based on state law. The only entity that is allowed to create a sales tax is the county. One of the comments we said is, why doesn't the county create a sales tax and give this money to the city? Well, first of all, the county sales tax, in order to be created, would have to be approved by the county board of supervisors. I'm not a psychic, but I would think that's a pretty hard task to accomplish. Secondly, we would have to convince the county to give a portion of that sales tax to the city. I would say that's also a very high hurdle that would probably never occur. But if those all occurred, yeah, that would be a solution. But I think that's a pretty high hurdle to think that could be accomplished. It's just based on state law in the state of Wisconsin. Now, Carmen talked about different life experiences. I have a lot of different life experiences, including living in the state of Minnesota. And sales tax laws, local government finance laws are all different across the country, including vehicle registration fee. If you lived outside of Wisconsin, you know that there are some states that charge vehicle registration based on the value of your vehicle. And I had a new car, a new vehicle, and I was paying multiple hundreds of dollars, close to $1,000 annually for my vehicle registration. That's just part of the system that's in play in other states, other governmental units. It's not the environment we're working on in the state of Wisconsin under today's laws. I sympathize with you. I understand. It would certainly be nice with all of the activities that come into our city that we would have a revenue stream associated with that. It is great for our lodging industry. It is great for our businesses. It's great for the community. But from a local government perspective, in us recapturing resources, we make a huge commitment in resources for special events. We try to charge special event fees that recover that. And again, people that are doing these special events are critical of the fees that we charge for that. But we tried to do a balanced approach with everything. And so we're working within the framework we have. It's unfortunate that is not part of that solution. But there is a mechanism for the county to create a sales tax if they wish. And then it would be up to the county. And the counties in Wisconsin, I think there's 72 counties, there's probably...
Only 3 of us left that don't have it.
I was going to say
We're one of
2
them.
or 3 that don't have it. And the ones that do have it, there's all this big battle between municipalities and cities and towns and villages getting a slice of that, and counties have no obligation to give us any portion at all of that slice.
When we adjourn, I'd be happy to give you my...
But I think it was a
then you'll
good
get bored.
education.
You'll get bored, but I don't want to bore the whole audience. I'll just bore you, and then you can walk away politely. Is there anybody else? Because we've done about an hour and a half, which is what we did the other day. Different twist on the questions, so these are great. But I want to be respectful. If you got something for the group, sure, please share it. Otherwise, Russ and I can hang around a few minutes afterwards and just talk to you about individual questions you might have.
I don't have any questions, but can I just have a little bitch session with you?
I'm glad the microphone wasn't by you, but we're more than happy to. That's okay. Well, thank you for coming. I really do appreciate the input you provide us, and we'll be sure to share this information with the council. And this, you'll see this replayed because this was a very good session, and I think it's worthy of replaying on Oshkosh Media. So you'll see that. You can go home and see yourself on TV. But everybody, thanks for coming. Have a great day.